So you're playing Sidereal Confluence and you need to learn the Zeth species. Well, you came to the right place. First, if you care, let's learn how to say the species, probably one of the easiest to say in the game. It's pronounced Zeth. Second, you need to know this is a game of compounded interest. Don't invest so hard in technology and upgrades that you leave yourself without resources, because resources are what you need for future turns. Now, let's read the background for this faction. The galaxy is full of marks. By the standards of the aliens, the Zeth are primitive, an Iron-Age civilization trapped in cycles of theft, manipulation, and extortion. What the Zeth lack in technological know-how, they make up in sheer deviousness and Machiavellian ability to manipulate their friends and enemies. What the Zeth lack in technological know-how, they make up in sheer deviousness and a Machiavellian ability to manipulate their friends and enemies. Their confluence is, while the Zeth are not unified by any means, certain partners have emerged. Zeth take advantage of alien weaknesses such as ethics and honesty to dominate black markets and illicit industries of all sorts. Simultaneously, they've begun collecting blackmail on the rich and powerful from the many alien species. The aliens fear what would happen should the Zeth dominate the growing society, but even this fear is a tool in the Zeth's manipulative arsenal. The Zeth player has an envoy factory that produces many resources, but all these resources need to be traded or gifted to the same player along with an envoy token. Players cannot refuse this gift, but the Zeth can trade envoy tokens from their stash to other players, but other players cannot trade them between each other, nor trade them back to the Zeth player. These resources that are produced are quite valuable, so all players should be willing to bid against each other. Its worth is a bit over 4 small cubes in trade. If players are not willing to bid up enough, try trading the rights to the output of the envoys that turn before you run it. And if that doesn't work, don't run envoys and save your resources instead. Players who have envoys should pay you more, and you can change more because your stealing converters can be upgraded. Even threatening to upgrade them without actually doing so can make a huge difference, but always keep that an option. Always keep that open. And part of doing this is using the Zeth salesmanship and persuading players to take envoys, not because you want to steal from them, but because it will encourage you to work closely together for the rest of the game. Now, when the Zeth are playing in the game, an additional phase is added to the game called the Zeth Steal phase. It is done after the Confluence phase. The Zeth player can run their red stealing converters during this phase, in which the output is the ability to take a set of resources from another player. These stealing converters care about the size and shape, but not the color, and each stealing converter can steal from exactly one player, but can't use 2 stealing converters against the same player in one turn. All stealing converters have at least 2 ways to pay for their input. If the target has envoy tokens, it's less expensive, and it doesn't use up those tokens. Also, you should know Unity's wild resources cannot be stolen. This species can be fun to play because all of the stealing that happens, but the Zeth cannot steal from a player that they traded with during the previous trade phase. Use the danger or the safe tokens to keep track of this for each player. This also means that the Zeth player can ask players to pay them off if they want to avoid being stolen from. But also know that donation resources that were forced do not count as a trade and doesn't offer protection from theft. Players also can't gift resources for protection, nor are safe when receiving the output of envoys as a gift instead of a trade. Donations can be traded to the Zeth, but need to be clearly stated. So, the best way to play this species? Ideally, you want to get paid every turn by every player to avoid you stealing from them. A payment of 1 small cube or an equivalent profit is a good starting value, but you need to be willing to steal from players who hold out. But really, receiving bribes is the goal, not stealing. You do way better when players just pay out. Acting is just as important as forming a strategy. Make players remember that you love stealing. You love stealing their hard-earned resources, and if someone doesn't trade with you, you're going to steal what's most valuable from them. The Zeth's primary export is suffering, and it works the best if you make it personalized suffering. Now, it can be hard to sell envoy tokens directly, but it can be very lucrative if the other players are willing to accept them. Be willing to negotiate when players can't afford to pay you an appropriate bribe. Offer to give them an envoy token instead. A smart player will take you up on that offer, and you've effectively invested in better payments in the future. Multi-turn deals are a weakness for the Zeth since it would count as a trade for both turns, granting that other player prolonged safety. Just remember to account this when making any deal that lasts more than one turn. Also, sometimes a player will get into their head that if you don't have black cubes, you can't steal from them. And this is false because Cascading Deception produces 2 black cubes every turn, which will be available to you during the Zeth steal phase every single time. Also, it's worth noting that the Zeth player does better with more players playing in the game. The Zeth regularly win in large games when all the players refuse to trade with the Zeth, but if just one player decides to defect and trade while nobody else does, the player that defects tends to win. Thus, the pressure to defect. Players also sometimes come up with their own little rules, like this one I found from a player who has played the Zeth many times. Well, he says, I charge protection based on how many envoy tokens a player has. None, and I charge a small. 1, and I charge a large. 2, I charge 2 smalls. And 3, I charge 2 larges. On the first turn, a small may be too expensive, so I'll charge that they must take an envoy token. And if I see a particular resource I strongly in demand for, I'll charge extra to any player who produces it because I'm threatening to steal that resource. And well, that's the Zeth. If you have any more ideas or recommendations on how to play with this species, please comment below. We would all love to read what you have to say about it.
Again, this is Boardgame Brody, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Stick around and check out some other board game reviews to see what you might want to get to the table.